Good morning, Light Miser here, aka Kimball. So here we are with part 2 of my Saudi Arabia theme park story. So we just landed in Saudi Arabia. There's 5 of us: myself, my older brother, Caius, who was doing our miniatures, the guy who built our animatronics, and the 5th guy I can't remember the name of. Probably could have asked my dad, but whatever. You'll find out here real quick why whatever. So we get in about 10:30 at night. We go to the village I was staying at on premise. We crash. Next morning, get up, have some breakfast, and my dad sits us down, lets us know that while we were in the air, the special effects company that had the contract, who just shifted ownership, realized they're going to make almost no money on this contract, so they decided to drop the contract. The Saudi Arabian company themselves had come to my dad, asked him if he would finish out the contract directly, being paid directly, not through the company. And so he presented it all to us to let us decide what we wanted to do. My dad was going to stay if he had enough help and finish it through. Well, of course, my brother and I are going to stay and support our dad. Caius decided that he would stay as long as he could, but he had another project to go work on. Later in the summer, he was scheduled to go work on the sci-fi Brad Pitt movie Red Planet, about going to Mars. And fun little film that was shot up in Canada. Our miniature guy said he was more than happy to come back when they were ready to install the miniature, but that's all he was interested in because that's the kind of work that he did. And the 5th guy, part of why I can't remember his name, is that he said, this isn't for me. So we put the miniature guy and that 5th guy on a plane, said, see ya, and we went to work. Now, initially on this contract, the idea was that they would have the building done, all the basic scenic work done. We would come in for 3 weeks, plug in the special effects, tune it up, and be out. Well, as I said in the last video, they just finished the building the week before my dad got there, and they realized that they had no idea how to do the scenic work to build this environment out. So our contract expanded, and we took on that task of it, which the theme of the hidden mine ride, this is Jungle Land, so the theming takes place in Africa. I can't remember if it was British or American. I want to say the main character was British, but had started a mine there in Africa. And as you began the ride, you see an African tribe doing rituals around where they're building the mine at. From there, you go into the mine itself. You come through what we called the Cave of Jewels, which we had built a bunch of fake jewels that lit up all around as you came through this part of the building, and from there you discovered that the mine itself was haunted, and a bunch of different effects along the way there. So we had to do just a general wall look as you came in, focusing on the miniatures, and from there make it look like you were actually in a mine that had been cut in. And the way we did that was with a lot of rebar, because this building was about 15 to 20 foot tall. So we built rebar structures covered in chicken wire and covered that in gunite, and then from there sculpted in the gunite to make it look like how we needed it to look. That's a lot of welding. That's a lot of rebar. And as we got going on this project, we had a bunch of day laborers, which all were illegal immigrants. See, in Saudi Arabia, especially where we're at in Jeddah, we're very close to the 2 holiest sites for Islam, Mecca and Medina. And it's a rite of passage for people to make a pilgrimage to those holy sites. In fact, at the airports, they have these giant overhangs for people that come in the summer that don't have a lot of money, so at least have somewhere to sit in the shade while they're being processed and figuring out what to do and all that. And what's interesting is in Mecca, they've got the holiest of, basically their holiest of holies, big mosque there. And there's pictures of it everywhere, all over the country. And they'll do big gatherings there, and they'll televise live. But if you're not Islamic, you are not allowed near those sites. In fact, we were told by our liaison, about a mile out, they've got their military that makes sure that only members of the Islam faith go through there. We didn't try and push their laws and all that stuff. We were respectful of that, but we were very well aware that that was part of the situation there. And so most of our laborers were Pakistani. We had a couple guys that were from Egypt. In fact, one guy that had come in, he was a university professor, and he made more money making $5 per day American from the company we were working for than he would make as a teacher back in Egypt. That's how messed up things were there. And we had a handful of Indians, but it was primarily Pakistani. So anyway, we went to work on building these structures. Most of these guys had no idea how to weld. I'd only done wire feed welding at that point. I learned how to stick weld while I was out there. And partway through the summer, we realized that we were never going to get this thing done in any kind of reasonable time, just running 12-hour days. So we added a night shift, which I volunteered to run supervisor on, because I'd much rather work nights than days. Spent 10 years in theater, what can I say? And so we hired in a bunch of guys that were welders working on American oil rigs that were Filipino. That's the crew that I was managing at night as we continued to build out this substructure, this rock structure, fake rock structure, as we went through. And partway through the summer, also the Saudis brought in the crew that they had recruited that were going to be the operational crew for this ride and most of the park, which were a bunch of 27-year-old guys out of the Philippines. And they offered us the use of those guys, which we used to some degree, but just general labor, because these guys were really unskilled. A couple of guys had some management skills, but they were not skilled in labor in that way at all, so we didn't use them a whole lot. They primarily were getting training on how to operate the rest of the park while we were doing our grunt work there, with the leads coming in occasionally and helping out and getting a feel for how things were going to operate and start our ride. Now, one of the conflicts I had is I had commitments back in the United States that I had to attend to that summer. As part of my job with the college, again, I thought I was going to be there for 3 weeks. I was going to be doing lighting and sound design for a melodrama that was being directed by the head of the theater department at a stage that the college owned. Only ran during the summer as up in Springdale, a town next to Zion National Park. So in the midst of the summer, I had to fly back, install the lighting for that, do a month of shows, and then come back to work on that, to work on the theme park. And by the time I got back there, they were about 75% of the way done with the scenic work. They did say that a lot of these welds were so bad with the guys who said they knew how to weld that really didn't. They had one wall that was just rebar that had literally just fallen off the wall. Thankfully, nobody got hurt because it was 20 foot tall, and then they had to get that back up there and actually weld it and mount it so it would stay. So when I got back from doing my time working on the show in America, they were far enough along that I could actually start working on my lighting, my sound, installing that gear, putting the wiring, and focusing really on my effect part of it. What I also discovered, and again, technology is always evolving, especially in the theme park world. One of the things I had to figure out was how I was going to trigger different effects. So the car goes down the ride, and at a certain point, it triggers that light's going to happen here, or fog's going to happen here, or smoke's going to happen here, sound effects are going to happen here. So it had to mount, and the track wasn't in yet, so I had to run wiring to where sensors would be eventually. But to trigger most of that, since I wasn't using an actual show controller, I had to figure out a way to do that. And what I discovered was I could hack using MIDI. Now this is going to get real tech for anybody who's interested in theme park tech, and this is like total ghetto theme park tech. the lighting console would accept that I was using as a show controller. It could fire off the sound effects, but it could be triggered using MIDI. And so I found a box that was contact closures that I could program in MIDI commands that would then run up to the lighting controller. But unfortunately, it was supposed to be a protocol called MIDI show control, which was supposed to be real easy. Send this MIDI that fire this sound, this effect, this cue, just do that. And it turns out it wouldn't actually do that. And so I had to program everything with custom MIDI commands in hex. So I had sheets and sheets of hex commands, because each command would be between 64 to 128 hex characters. It was ugly. It was not fun, but got it to work. So we're moving along with this, getting everything installed, getting ready, and then the company that was contracted to do the actual ride showed up. Well, the Saudis had hired a company out of Italy that really their bread and butter was doing mobile carnival rides. And so the car system itself, the tracks, I mean, it was all solid, but it was really meant for little kids. I could barely fit into the car. And Saudis, the actual Saudi citizens, those that have money, which most of them do, show their money and their wealth by gaining weight. And so these Saudi adults had a real hard time fitting in those cars. But so the Italians came in, put in the ride system. Then we were scrambling to get all of the sensors and everything working around that. And after the ride system was in was when we brought back the miniature guy to get the animatronic guy to get his one animatronic back up and running again. The animatronic stood about 2.5, 3 foot tall. And I said a projector that would project the face inside a fiberglass screen. If you've been to Disneyland and been on Buzz Lightyear ride, how they did the Buzz Lightyear faces, that same technology. And the animatronic itself didn't move a whole lot, but kind of jerked around a little bit and whatnot. But he came in, got it set up, got it timed up, and was there like maybe a week and was gone. That's all. He wanted to be there as quickly as possible, in and out. And then it was up to us to finalize all that out. There was one section where we had a projector set up that you would see the ghost of this miner, and he would say his final little spiel near the end of the ride. And because those were images, and we didn't know about this when we were starting out, once we got far enough along, we had to, where we could actually show to some degree what was going on. They had to bring in the religious leaders, have them ride the ride to see if we were approved to run this ride in Saudi Arabia or not, and to go through the park as a whole, because they have very specific guidelines about engraven images. It's needed to find out if that fell within that or not. We got the okay. They felt it did not upset their religious views. As we were progressing through the creation of this, while I was gone, my dad realized he needed more help, and so he brought another effects guy that he could trust that my dad had worked with since the 70s. And old friend of the family, and we were chatting, discovered that he was on Prozac. There was a chemical imbalance that runs in his family that they didn't know about from his ancestors, and so that actually helped him to level things out, and he was actually dealing with life a lot better by having that. Didn't think much of it from there until he started getting suddenly very aggressive, and we discovered that he had run out of his prescription, and he was just trying to limp it along until he could fly back and pick up a refill. And he figured they were trying to arrange it so like in a week or two he could fly back for a couple of days to get his prescription and come back. Well, there was one section of the ride that he was working on, and he ducked underneath a track section and misgauged the depth and came up and hit his head really bad. I mean, we ended up having to take him to go get a couple of stitches. But right then, our liaison that hired us came around the corner, and this guy is dropping F-bombs at everybody, just getting very aggressive. Well, the Saudi citizens take that type of language extremely personal, extremely serious. We ended up taking this guy down to a quick med place to get stitches, and while we were there, we went to a pharmacy, gave him a couple painkillers from that, but he also had the bottle from his prescription saying, I really need a refill. See, you can see it's prescribed. I don't have the actual prescription with me, but you can see from the bottle. And the pharmacist looks at it and then points. Turns out, at that time in Saudi, that they sold Prozac over the counter. At least he was able to get a refill. We also had discovered that one of our guys got a cold from going outside in the heat to inside an AC back and forth a bunch in the middle of the summer. He ended up getting a cold, and their cough syrup all has codeine in it without a prescription over the counter. Different countries, different rules. So after the interaction between our liaison and the guy my dad had brought in that was dropping the F-bombs, the relationship between us and the Saudis really started to deteriorate. We think part of it was that they were running out of money. It's taken much longer for us to get this done because they hadn't planned for the scenic aspects and what that would cost and what that would take. And at least at that point, the Saudi Arabia culture really had no concept of project planning. I mean, we watched them put in a ditch to bring in a water line into our building, fill that ditch back in with a bunch of laborers by hand. A week later, I'm out there again, and they've got the same laborers digging up the same ditch to put in a natural gas line and fill it back in. A week later, they're digging it up to bring in another data line. I mean, just the concept of digging a ditch once and throwing in 3 conduits and planning that out, it just didn't exist. And so, with the scope of this project, where we really felt like they were running shy of funds, in the end, they ended up not paying us for our time in country. In fact, my older brother ended up losing money on the project. My dad, of course, lost money for his time out there, and he tried to give out what money he could to the other guys. I was really the only one who came out ahead on the project because not only did I have the contract through my dad to do lighting, sound, and show control for the ride itself, they found out his son was doing that. They liked my dad. This was way back at the beginning of the contract, and are big on family, so they gave me a second contract putting in show controls, especially lighting or in certain areas like a waterfall they'd put in the main gathering area, and speakers and sound effects through all the walkways of the park. Being jungle land, you'd hear during the day lions roaring, birds crying, things like that. And then as it went towards evening, it would transition to crickets and night noises. And so I made them pay me ahead for all the equipment that I sent out there with my markup. So I didn't get paid for my time in Saudi, but at least made money on the project because of all the gear that I sent out there. And being international, we were kind of stuck on, didn't have a really great way to go, and so we never be able to go after those funds. I know that the park opened and operated coming out of COVID. I'd heard that they had, actually way before COVID, they had gotten started doing some expansion work to. They said they're going after becoming an edutainment, which is more education with entertainment. But at the same time, they put on some roller coasters. It really had more of a carnival theme to it than actual, more of a adventure park than a theme park. Because actual theme park, you have themes going all the way through it. It's a different concept, a different approach, and you really have to have theming people to understand that difference from the creation of it, the design of it, which obviously they didn't have consistently throughout their growth. Post-COVID, I've tried to look up information on it, and I don't know if they've reopened. The place is called Jungle Land at Marsal Village outside of Jeddah, Saudi Arabia. You can find some information. Some people have posted a few things here and there, but not a whole lot. But that is the condensed version of the oddest project that I have worked on to date. Hey, thanks for listening. We'll talk to you later. Bye.